Thank God for your safe return, Mrs. Salma. How are you doing? I'm fine, thank God. When can I leave? Just a day, don't worry. We'll keep you under observation to make sure everything is okay. Then, I can go home? I closed my eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When I opened them, I heard knocking on the door. There were 2 people standing in front of the door, and they seemed to be nurses. I looked at them and smiled, then I searched the room with my eyes for the doctor. I couldn't find him. Excuse me, where did the doctor who was just here go? The doctor? Who? There was a doctor here just a moment ago, talking to me. Where did he go? He hasn't left yet, ma'am. He's checking on a couple of other patients before he comes back to you. But he was just here. Was the nurse confused or something? My name is Salma. I'm in the hospital because of a very minor accident. An accident that could happen to anyone, but unfortunately, it turned into a huge disaster. This morning, after my husband left for work, I went to take a shower to start my day full of energy. After I finished the shower, I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. I tried for a long time and couldn't get it open. Thankfully, the bathroom window overlooks the balcony. I opened the window and used a chair I found on the balcony. I stood on the chair and tried to climb through the window. Since the door wouldn't open, I thought I'd try another way. But, as I mentioned, I have this strange ability. Any small event can turn into a disaster, and it happened. While I was trying to climb out of the window, the chair moved from under me, and the last thing I remember is falling and not being able to catch myself. Peace be upon you. This is a new episode of Untold Stories, inspired by real events, titled The Bloody Door. What's the story behind this door? Well, we haven't even started talking about the door yet. But everything you've heard so far is wrong, all wrong, without exception. Because sometimes, things can seem one way, but turn out to be something completely different. So let's continue and see where the episode goes, because up until now, we've reached the point where she fell and couldn't save herself. Let's see what happened next. I woke up several hours later and found myself in the hospital. My husband was there with me, and he told me that when he got to work, he tried calling me multiple times, but I didn't answer. He started to feel anxious, so he called one of the neighbors to knock on my door. When the neighbor knocked and I didn't open, he became sure that something was wrong. Since he knew me and was aware of my ability to turn small accidents into disasters, he was certain something had happened. He took leave from work and rushed home to find me. Of course, he couldn't find me. When he opened the bathroom door, he found me lying on the floor, unable to speak, with blood pouring from my head. He picked me up and rushed me to the hospital. From the moment I arrived, I've been going through scans and tests. It's been just a few hours, and I only slept for a short time. When I woke up, I saw the doctor I had been speaking with earlier standing by my bed. Good evening, Mrs. Salma. How are you feeling? I'm fine, thank God. See, Mrs. Salma, didn't I tell you that the doctor would come to you? But I wasn't talking about this doctor, I was talking about another one. Another doctor? What do you mean, Ma'am Salma? Dr. Ayman is the one in charge of your case. There's no other doctor replacing him while he's here. You must have been dreaming. I looked at her, not understanding if she was joking, mocking me, or lying. I saw the man, I talked to him. I couldn't have been dreaming. And why would she lie like that? Honestly, I even wondered if the person who entered the room was a fraud. But Dr. Ayman said the exact same thing as the doctor before him. So, I knew he wasn't an imposter, just a doctor or maybe a random person passing by, or someone trying to flirt. He was wearing a coat and had an ID badge with his name on it, so he was definitely from the hospital. Maybe the nurse wasn't paying attention or was just fooling around. The next day, after the doctor signed my discharge papers, Abdullah and I were about to leave. He asked me to wait in the hospital reception while he went to bring the car closer to the door. This was my first time at this hospital, so I just started looking around at the decor and design. I actually studied architecture and I'm currently working on my master's degree, so I'm naturally drawn to such details in any place I visit. As I was looking around, suddenly, I saw him. Yes, the same doctor who came into my room and talked to me. His picture was hanging on the wall at the hospital entrance, surrounded by many other pictures of different people. I recognized him immediately. I walked over to the wall and looked at the photo. It had the name Hamdi Abdul Manem 1978 Police 2018 written on it. I stood frozen, not understanding what the dates meant. Was he born in 1978 and died in 2018? How could that be? He was just standing in front of me yesterday, talking to me and knowing all the details of my condition. Maybe it was someone who looked like him, maybe it was his son. Salma, Abdullah, what's wrong with you? I didn't respond at first. He had called me several times. What's wrong? You seem spaced out. No, nothing's wrong. Let's go. I sat next to him in the car, but I couldn't focus on anything he was saying. I kept thinking about the doctor from yesterday and the photo I had seen in the reception. I couldn't make sense of it. My head felt like it was about to explode from the headache, from the accident, and from the confusion over that mysterious doctor and the photo. When we got home, I couldn't think about anything other than that doctor. I spent 2 days in that state, unable to focus on anything. Then, on the first day that Abdullah went back to work, I decided to go to the hospital. I didn't know what I would ask or what I would say, but something inside me was urging me to find answers. Curiosity was killing me. I drove to the hospital and stood there for a while, wondering what to say. In the end, I convinced myself to go in and ask anything, since I didn't know what to think anymore. I walked up to one of the receptionists and asked, "Is Dr. Hamdi Abdul Manem working here?" She looked at me, confused, like she didn't understand what I was talking about. It seemed she didn't know who Dr. Hamdi Abdul Manem was. I pointed to the picture on the wall and explained to her that he was the one in the photo. One of the janitors, an elderly and kind woman, stood nearby. She looked at me and said, "Who are you asking about, ma'am?" "I'm asking about Dr. Hamdi Abdul Manem. Dear Hamdi, may he rest in peace, passed away 6 years ago." "Yes, I know. He had a son who works here." Dear Hamdi didn't have any sons, just 2 daughters, and both of them live abroad. "What do you want from him? How did Dr. Hamdi die?" "Oh, poor man, he was such a good doctor. He never let anyone down. One day, 3 people came to the hospital, all involved in a fight. One of them was dead on arrival, his head nearly severed from his body. The doctors worked on the other 2, and everything seemed calm until we all heard a loud crash and shouting. Everyone ran to the emergency room, thinking there were new cases. But it turned out that the family of the dead man had come to attack the doctors, blaming them for his death. Dr. Hamdi was there and ordered the nurses to lock the doors and get everyone out. But one of the men took out a knife and stabbed him in the neck. He died on the spot, bleeding out. The family then took the body of their son and left. By the time the doctors returned, the entire hospital was in hiding, except for Dr. Hamdi. I thanked the woman who was talking to me, but I felt like I couldn't see properly, and I couldn't comprehend what was happening. I couldn't tell if what I had heard was real, a joke, or a made-up story. The man didn't even have children, and he passed away in 2018. So, how could I have seen him and spoken to him? What was going on? I went home, still unable to calm myself. I had no idea how time passed until Abdullah came back. I didn't know whether to tell him or hide it. If I were to tell him, what would I say? That I saw the ghost of a dead doctor who spoke to me? Abdullah noticed something was off and tried to ask me about it. But I told him I was just tired and my stomach hurt, which is why I didn't look okay. But there was nothing to worry about. A week passed, and I started to forget about it a little and act more normally. I had an appointment with my professor for my thesis because, as I told you, I'm preparing for my master's degree. I went to the appointment, finished up with the doctor, and then went to my mom's house to pick up some books. But before I went upstairs to my mom's place, I saw her. I saw Shams standing in front of me, looking at me. She wasn't moving or speaking, she wasn't doing anything at all. I blinked, opened my eyes several times, but she was still standing there. My heart was racing with fear. Shams was my neighbor at my mom's house. She was a few years older than me, and she had committed suicide over 12 years ago. I still remember that day clearly. I was in my room studying for an exam the next day, and I was probably in second year of middle school. I heard someone screaming and ran to my mom, terrified. She was also startled by the noise, and we both rushed to the balcony. We found out the screams came from Shams' mom's place. The whole street gathered that day, and we learned that Shams had taken her life. Shams was a sweet, kind girl, but unfortunately, her mother's husband was a cruel and abusive man. He only understood violence, and even though Shams was 25 years old, he would still beat her. Her screams were heard by the whole street every day. And because he was such a terrible man, none of us dared to talk to him or confront him about how he treated Shams. One day, he beat her in the street in front of everyone. After a few hours, we heard her mother screaming, calling for Shams, and that's when we found out that Shams had taken her life. The strange thing is that after Shams' death, her mother continued living with her husband as if nothing had happened. I was thinking about all of this when I saw Shams still standing in the same spot, right next to her house, in the very place where she had been beaten in front of the whole street. The moment I moved closer to her, she vanished within seconds. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what had just happened until I heard someone calling my name. It was my brother. He greeted me and asked why I was standing there like that. I couldn't answer him, but I left with him, still full of questions. I spent the day with my mom and siblings, trying to act normal as much as I could. But when I went home, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I talked to Abdullah and told him everything. Abdullah couldn't grasp or believe what I was saying, but he tried not to show it. I couldn't blame him. What would anyone in his position say? I saw the spirits of the dead. Of course, he wouldn't believe me. But I noticed something. When I was at our house today, I didn't see the spirits of my father or my grandmother, even though they both died in the house. My grandmother passed away because of old age, and my father died from a heart attack. So why didn't I see them? The doctor was murdered, and Shams died by suicide. Both of them died in unnatural ways, yet I saw their spirits. Abdullah suggested that I get closer to God, pray more, and read the Quran. I really tried to do that, but he was convinced that maybe when I fell in the bathroom, something happened to me, like possession or something like we hear about. He thought that was the reason for everything I was seeing and hearing at the hospital. But I didn't feel like that was the explanation. I tried to reassure Abdullah that I would stick to my religious duties, pray more, and read the Quran, just as he had asked. At the same time, I started searching for any information that might help me understand what was happening to me. I searched the internet in both Arabic and English, hoping to find an explanation. There was only one article in English, which talked about people who developed supernatural abilities after experiencing accidents, abilities like predicting the future, despite knowing that only God knows the unseen, or sensing the energy of the people around them, or even communicating with spirits. What I understood from that article is that it's a very rare phenomenon, but it happens. However, there's still no scientific or logical explanation for it. The article also mentioned that some people believe the way a person dies affects the spirit's fate. If someone dies a natural death, their soul transitions to the afterlife normally, but if the death is unnatural, if the death was natural or involved violence or pain, the spirit stays on earth until it reaches the stage of salvation, which is when the spirit finds peace and then moves to the afterlife. I've seen many comments about this, and I remembered something I read a while ago. It said that if something happens, like an accident on a road, and if the accident occurred there after the body is moved, its spirit will remain on that road. These are the kinds of things I used to hear in stories, but they were supposed to be fictional. There were many comments from people on the article. Some said they experienced similar situations, while others mocked it, and one even wrote the name of a TV show called Ghosts. The strange thing is that, even though the show is a comedy, it almost tells the exact same thing that happened to me. The main character fell on her head, and when she woke up, she discovered that she could see the spirits of people who had died and were still unable to find peace or move on to the afterlife. The show is supposed to be funny, but I was watching it, terrified. Is this going to be the life I'm stuck with now? Is this what I'll face every time I go somewhere or enter a place? How will I live like this? How will I differentiate between people who are alive and the spirits of the dead? My mental state deteriorated a lot, and I stopped going out or visiting any places without giving a reason to anyone. But only a month ago, Abdullah came to me and asked me to go to his mom's house. Come on, sweetheart, I understand you don't want to go out, but it's impossible to keep isolating yourself like this. You haven't left the house in over a month and a half. Why can't you understand that I'm really scared, Abdullah? I don't want to, and I can't go through these situations again. This has happened twice already, and at the time, I was still under the shock from the hit to my head. Now you're completely healed, so you probably won't see or hear anything anymore. And by the way, I'm not saying we should go out to have fun. We're just going to my mom's house. And I'm telling you, you won't see any spirits there. You're mocking me, still don't believe me? I'm not mocking you at all. I'm just trying to reassure you. Okay, Abdullah, fine, let's go. So, we went to my mother-in-law's house. That day, Aunt Naima was a kind and beautiful woman. She only had Abdullah and Abdulrahman, her husband, who had passed away a long time ago, even before Abdullah and I met. Abdullah's family's house was large, with 2 floors. My mother-in-law lived on the first floor, and Abdullah's older brother, Abdulrahman, lived on the 2nd floor. The ground floor was a garage with some stores. My mother-in-law had prepared a room for Abdullah and me to stay in whenever we visited. I expected her to be upset because I hadn't been visiting her for a while, and Abdullah had been coming alone. But thankfully, she understood. Abdullah told her that I had been sick and not well since the accident. We celebrated her birthday, and it was just me, Abdullah, Abdulrahman, his wife, and their 3 kids. After the celebration, it got late, and Aunt Naima went to her room to sleep. Abdullah also went to bed early because he had work the next day. The next morning, I couldn't sleep, so I stayed sitting in front of the TV. I don't even know how much time passed until I suddenly noticed someone standing in front of me, a woman I didn't recognize. It was the first time I'd seen her. She was staring at me. It felt like she was suffocating me. I jumped up, panicked, unable to catch my breath. I couldn't tell if it was a dream or if someone was actually standing there. I closed my eyes, tried to breathe calmly, and when I opened them again, she was gone. I put my hand over my chest, feeling like my heart was about to jump out of my chest from the shock. Then, I turned off the TV, rushed to the room, jumped into bed, covered myself, and didn't know how long I had been there. All I felt was pure terror. I couldn't even remove the blanket from my face. The next day, I woke up and found that Abdullah wasn't beside me. I looked at my phone and saw that it was 11 a.m. Abdullah had gone to work. I called him to check on him, and then I went to have breakfast with Aunt Naima, who had been waiting for me. We talked about my master's degree, my mom, and my siblings. We watched TV and cooked lunch together, and I forgot about the nightmare I had seen the night before. Yesterday, we had gotten used to spending time at Aunt Naima's house. We would all hang out together, and Abdul Rahman would go out with his wife and kids to join us. Honestly, those were always the best nights. While we were all sitting, enjoying a movie, I saw her again. She passed behind the TV, and I was holding a cup. My hand shook violently. Thankfully, Abdullah was sitting next to me and grabbed the cup from my hand. I kept watching her with my eyes as she walked across the room, staring at us with a look of intense anger until she completely disappeared. My face must have been showing that something was wrong, that something wasn't right. Luckily, the movie ended soon after. As soon as it finished, Abdullah took me to the room. "Salma, what's wrong with you? What happened? Did someone say something that upset you? Did something happen to make you upset?" No, nothing happened." "Well, with the way you're acting, I'm supposed to believe nothing happened?" "Salma, tell me, seriously, what's going on?" I saw something. I don't know if you'll believe me, but I saw a woman here, someone I don't know. It was the first time I saw her." "A woman? Who is this woman?" "I don't know. I don't know who she is. Maybe I'm imagining things. What would a woman be doing here? Is this your house, or maybe you bought it from someone who used to live here?" "This house was built by my father and grandfather. It's ours, and no one else has ever lived here." I don't know, Abdullah." "Salma, are you sure you saw someone? Are you sure? What did she look like? Was she old?" No, she was young, like a young woman, a young girl." "Was there anyone who died here, fitting this description?" "No, only my grandmother. But when she passed away, she was about 54 years old." "Okay, Abdullah, it's fine. Maybe I'm just imagining things and there's nothing there. But I was sure I wasn't imagining it. I saw someone, a young and beautiful woman. I don't know who she was, but I'm sure of what I saw." But Abdullah's looks and questions made me doubt myself. Maybe he's right. Maybe something happened in my head, something in the hospital. I didn't see her for a few days, but I kept seeing her. One day, when Abdullah wasn't around, she was on my mind. I kept thinking about her. "Abdullah, can I ask you something?" "Sure, my dear." "What is it?" "I want to go to the hospital." "Why? Are you feeling sick?" "No, I'm fine. I just want to get an MRI of my brain. I think something might be wrong with my brain. Maybe something to do with the hospital I was treated at. They didn't see anything, but maybe she's the reason I'm seeing these things. I mean, how is it possible that I see people in front of me who aren't there? Listen to me, Salma. I thought about what's happening to you a lot. At first, I didn't really understand it. But when I thought about it, I realized it could be possible. If it were just illusions, it would happen all the time, everywhere. Why don't you see anything in our apartment, though? Why do you only see things outside the house, in places where terrible things happened? I thought about that, too, and I figured my subconscious mind is playing tricks on me. It's only happening in specific places and with certain people. And if it's playing tricks on you because of what happened with Shams, maybe the doctor you saw at the hospital, you've seen his picture before or read about him? Salma, that was your first time at that hospital, and you said yourself that you didn't know the doctor's name until you read it on the picture, and you didn't know what happened with him until the woman told you. So how is that possible? Then, what are you saying? I mean, why not? Why couldn't it be a gift from God? Maybe a special ability that you have. Maybe this is your purpose in life. Okay, so if this is truly a gift from God and what's happening is real, then who is the woman I saw here? I don't know her. But what I do know is that you have to keep going. You need to continue your journey. You need to at least understand your abilities and see how far you can go. Abdullah's words were convincing to me, or maybe I was just convincing myself so I wouldn't feel crazy. That's why we decided to stay at his mom's house. She was happy to have us and didn't want us to leave. I kept seeing the same woman again and again. She would look at me with a look of anger, but wait, no, she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Abdullah. When I described her to Abdullah, he said he didn't know her, and he seemed genuinely surprised that he didn't know her. He wasn't lying, but why was she looking at him like that? What did he do to her for her to look at him like that? One day, Abdullah was at the doctor's office with his mom, and I was alone. I made up my mind that if I saw her, I would talk to her. I was going to ask her who she was. Maybe she would acknowledge that I could see her and talk to me. I waited for a long time, and then she appeared. She was walking behind the TV, as usual. As soon as she came near where I was sitting, I said to her, "Who are you?" She stopped in her tracks and stared at me in the eyes, as if she couldn't believe someone could see her. It was the first time I noticed that her feet weren't touching the ground. She was moving like she was floating. It was so close that I didn't realize she was floating at first. She kept looking at me for about a minute, as if she couldn't believe that I spoke to her. After a moment, she moved away and disappeared again. I followed her, trying to speak to her again, but sadly, I didn't catch up with her. I waited for Abdullah to return and told him what had happened. At that moment, he had no idea who she was or why she was appearing at their house. By that time, we were going back and forth to his mom's house for a couple of days. We went back to spend the rest of the week at Aunt Naima's, Abdullah's mom. We stayed with her for the rest of the days, and one day, Abdul Rahman was there with his son. His little boy asked about his uncle Hamed. Hamed passed away when the boy was about a few months old, so of course, he didn't know what he looked like. Abdul Rahman brought a big bag and opened it. It was full of old photo albums, photos I'd never seen before. Abdullah showed me pictures of his family, his dad, pictures of him when he was young at school, at the beach, and we were all laughing. Of course, anyone Abdullah and Abdul Rahman didn't know, Aunt Naima was asking us about them, like, "Who is this? When was this picture taken?" Until a picture came into my hands. I felt like the world stopped around me. All the sounds went quiet, and suddenly, all I could hear was my own breath and the beat of my heart. The picture was of Hamed when he was a child, and beside him was the same girl I keep seeing here in the house. I stared at the picture for a long time, until Abdullah's hand shook me, waking me up. "Are you sleeping while sitting? What's going on? Who is this, Abdullah?" "I don't know." "Wait a minute, who is this?" "Mom, this is your Aunt Sana. Don't you remember her?" "Aunt Sana? No, I don't remember her." "You were very young then. You were about 4 years old when she left, so of course you wouldn't remember her." "Where did she go? Where did she leave?" "Forget it, it's a story from the past. May God have mercy on her." "No, Mom, please tell me, how can I not know about this?" "What story?" "There's no story. Your Aunt Sana was young, and her father spoiled her. She refused many suitors for years, and no one knew why, until one day someone came to your grandfather and asked for her hand. This guy had a bad reputation, a terrible one. Your grandfather rejected him, worried about her and the family's reputation. But she didn't agree with her father's decision. She tried to convince him, begged him, but he didn't agree. Then one day, when we came home, we found that she had disappeared. We knew she must have run away with him. And from that day on, we never knew anything about her. Everything we knew was that the man she ran away with was imprisoned after they escaped together for about a year. And at that point, your grandfather still hoped she would come back and planned to forgive her, but she never came back. No one knew where she went. Your father searched for her for a long time, but couldn't find her anywhere. Your grandmother, may God have mercy on her, suffered so much from the pain of not seeing her daughter, and she longed to see her. Until one day, she met a kind soul, and that person was also hoping to meet her daughter. Your grandfather passed away a few years later, waiting for her to come back. During his final days, he would always ask, "Is it Sana at the door?" Your father's mental state deteriorated during this time. He lost his sense of living until maybe 6 or 7 months after your grandfather passed away. May God forgive them all. After Aunt Naima's story, the evening ended. Abdullah and Abdulrahman started putting away the pictures, and I kept holding Sana's picture in my hands, thinking, if she really ran away, why does her soul feel so tied to this house? And why does she still look the same age as she did in the picture? She should have aged, just like anyone else who passed away. If she really died. Aunt Naima's words kept repeating in my mind. I tried to arrange them to understand what was happening. If Sana's spirit is in this house, then that means one thing: Sana didn't run away like Aunt Naima said. Sana is here, in the house. But how and why? No one knows. Her mother passed away, and she longed to see her. Her father waited for her for so many years. Abdulrahman, her brother, searched for her. So why is she still here? Something doesn't make sense. As I was sitting there thinking and holding her picture, I saw her again. She was looking at me and coming toward me. I wasn't scared. I just wanted to know what had happened to her. Her face was sad, and she was crying, but she didn't make a sound. I could feel her voice inside me, like vibrations in my heart. I focused on those vibrations until I heard the word "the red door." I don't know why, but I felt like I was saying it to myself without speaking. Then Sana walked away, and I stayed frozen in place, unable to move. Until Abdullah came and sat beside me. He started talking. "There's something wrong." "What's wrong with what your mom said?" "If the one you're seeing is really Aunt Sana's spirit, then how can she be here? And why would her spirit be here? What do you think that means?" "I don't know." I saw her again." "Did she speak to you?" "She spoke to me." "What did she say?" "She didn't say anything." I felt like her words were echoing inside me. She said, "the red door." "What does that mean?" "I don't know. Maybe there's a red door here somewhere. Long ago, there was actually a red door." "Where is it?" "In the garage. It was in my father's room, which he turned into a storage space. The door was red." "Okay, let's go downstairs and check." "It's late, Salma." "Wait until morning." "No, there's light." "Please, Abdullah, get up and come with me." "I can't wait until morning." Abdullah wasn't convinced by what I was saying, but he knew that when I focus on something, I don't stop until I do it. So he came with me. We turned on the garage light and approached the door, which was covered with a lot of clutter. Abdullah looked at me, as if saying, "I told you." And of course, since it was late, any movement in the stuff would make a horrible noise, so we decided to leave and come back the next day. I couldn't sleep a second, and Abdullah couldn't either. As soon as it was 9 a.m., Abdulrahman went to work, and his children went to school. Abdullah and I moved after telling Aunt Naima that Abdullah wanted to tidy up the garage. We went downstairs and started moving everything from in front of the door. The door was metal and originally red, but after all the years, the rust had changed the color to brown. After over an hour of work, the door was finally clear in front of us. We thought we could open it easily, but we were surprised to find a large metal chain and 2 huge locks on the door, and of course, we didn't have the keys. Abdullah told me he didn't remember ever seeing the door open before, but he started looking for something around us to break the chain and locks. We found a big hammer in Abdul Rahman's toolbox, which was in the garage. Abdullah took it and started hitting the locks until one after the other broke. At that point, Abdullah grabbed the door and opened it, making a horrible sound as if it hadn't been opened in 100 years. Even though it opened, it was extremely difficult. I had to help Abdullah push it. But I noticed that his face suddenly turned pale with fear. He dropped the door and stepped back until he leaned against the wall and sat on the ground, putting his hands on his face, crying. I didn't understand what was happening or why he was acting like that. I got closer to him, hugged him, and tried to calm him down, asking what was wrong, but he couldn't speak. He couldn't even breathe properly. I stayed there, sitting beside him and hugging him until he calmed down. Then he started speaking on his own. I don't know how I forgot that day. I'm the only one who knew the secret. I'm the only one who knew where Sanaa went on that day. I was so sick in the hospital, shaking from the fever, when I saw my father come to me. I asked him where we were going, and he said they called him to come pick me up and get me some medicine to rest. We went home, and my father called my aunt to come change my clothes while he went to buy the medicine, but she didn't answer. So my father went to her room and I heard him yelling at her. I snuck up to the door to listen. I saw him telling her that he wouldn't let her escape. He wouldn't let her do whatever she wanted, and if it came to it, he would lock her up and force her to stay. Then, he went to the red door and tried to bring her inside. But before he could close the door, she started screaming, threatening to go to the police and expose him. And that's when my father pushed her. She fell, and a piece of metal, which I'd seen in front of the garage before, pierced her stomach. I gasped in shock when I saw what happened, and my father noticed me for the first time. He rushed toward me, terrified that I had seen everything. I was shaking, terrified. That was the most scared I've ever been in my life. My father told me to go upstairs and forget everything that had happened. He told me I was sick and needed to rest. So I went upstairs. I don't know how I forgot. How could I forget everything that happened? I tried to calm Abdullah down, but I couldn't understand how all of this had happened in front of him when he was just a little boy. He was only 4. I knew that when the mind experiences a huge shock, it often tries to deny it, like it never happened. And that's exactly what happened with Abdullah. Abdullah had learned the biggest secret, one that could explain the destruction of his family, and the way his father's image was shattered in his brother's and mother's eyes. Now, I finally understood that Sanaa was looking at Abdullah in anger. But I didn't know how to help her. I didn't know how to ease her troubled soul. I didn't know if Abdullah and I would be able to confront them with what we knew, or if we would even be able to enter that house again. And with that, the story ends. I hope you liked it. I hope the message in it was clear. Even if it's not completely clear now, with time, it will become clearer, very clear.